Okay, let's share screen. There it is. Okay, so my research topic was, how does a dance teacher without SEND training approach the inclusion of SEND students in non-formal education? So SEND meaning special educational needs and disabilities. The aim of the project was to find positive approaches that dance teachers outside of school settings can use to support inclusion. So I am an Imperial Society of Teachers of Dancing dance teacher. I work in non-formal educational settings and I have limited SEND training. So I would describe the training I received from the ISTD when I qualified with them as minimal on inclusion and SEND students. This has always been a sticking point for me because whenever I've had SEND students attend my classes, I've felt like I'm in a tough position between catering to the needs of the whole class and that of the SEND student. Journaling about my practice kind of uncovered this as a sticking point for me. And I wanted to use this research project to improve my professional practice and provide a more inclusive environment for STEM students. For an overview of my inquiry process, I followed a mostly qualitative research approach with a non-positivist view. So I wanted to gather subjective thoughts and ideas and not create just one-size-fits-all results. So because the needs of SEND students are going to be varied, I thought the positive approaches are going to be varied and subjective. For the data collection methods, first of all, I did an online survey. So I sent out a survey to dance teachers in Facebook groups that I'm a member of. So that would be ISTD groups. It was really important to ask ISTD teachers so I could find out positive approaches from people who work in the same context that I do. I also asked my teaching peers. I asked them about the positive approaches they use when teaching the SEND students. I also asked them questions about their training, SEND training, resources they use and adaptations they make and class structure, etc. So for the survey, I constructed it with mostly text box open format questions to get qualitative data, but I also had some checkbox questions as well to get quantitative statistical data. So I had 38 participants for the online survey. Moving on to the observations, I observed 2 inclusive dance specialists from different companies, and these are inclusive community companies that have more creative classes, not syllabus as such. And they had different ages and varied needs within the class. I entered the observations with an unstructured observational approach. So that meant keeping ideas of what themes might emerge at the back of my head. So I thought about the stuff that emerged from module 2. So I thought about that when entering the observations. I didn't have set criteria. I just made notes on everything that I saw and witnessed. In terms of ethics for going back to the key theorist there, which was Audla, her study in 2021, where ISTD dance teachers engaged with SEND dance specialists to improve the ISTD teachers' inclusion in their classes. For this one, where they collaborated, the SEND dance teachers watched the ISTD teachers. Where I thought this might not be possible for my study, I wanted to see if I flipped it on its head and I watched inclusive specialists, if I could glean positive approaches from them. And I did. In terms of ethics, coming back to the ethics, the considerations I had to make was the safety of the SEND students, so because they can be vulnerable. So I ensured that I only observed the inclusive specialists, the teachers, and not the SEND students. I also ensured that I sent out appropriate consent and gatekeeper forms, so the gatekeeper forms for the inclusive dance organisations. I also ensured that all data about the participants was anonymised, and then I stored it on the Middlesex University OneDrive to ensure that the data was safe under GDPR regulations. I then conducted thematic analysis, which involved coding the data, and then I constructed the following themes. First one being differentiation and adaptation. So I have defined this as the customization of pedagogical practices to deliver class content to support the individual learning needs of every student. I'm familiar with differentiation from my ISTD training, but it was only really discussed there in terms of different abilities within the class and how you teach different abilities in a class, not different needs. So this emerged as a theme within secondary data. So again, the study by Audler that I mentioned as being influential. She said an important aspect of translation and differentiation is understanding the individual dancer and what they need in that moment. So she uses the word translation there, and I interpret that as translating the ISTD syllabus material because she was working with ISTD teachers. So that's the adaptation of material to support all students. Looking over to the left to the primary data, looking at the observations. So observation participant 2, she differentiated and adapted her choreography by having 2 separate versions, one for standing dancers and one for seated dancers in wheelchairs. So she had 2 different versions there. Looking further down now at the survey participants, they generally followed the same consensus as survey participant 6, saying, I follow the learners. So they adapt their class and follow the needs of the students at that time. Survey participant 3, interestingly, kind of contrasted this view and said, content doesn't need to be watered down or babied, which I would suggest is poor pedagogical language and suggests the infantilization of SEND students. So I found this to be quite inappropriate language and could show that a lack of training or awareness. In my professional experience, if we hop over to the right side now, as I said, I was aware of differentiation before. I've recently undertook some inclusive ballet training where the universal design theory was discussed, and that's defined as the design of products and environments to be usable by all people without adaptation or specialized design. So even though it says without adaptation there, I interpret that as without adaptation by the student. So as the teacher, I would take on the adaptation and differentiate my teaching material so that students don't have to. So an example of this would be jumps or allegro in ballet, where a jump would suggest an aesthetic outcome, so having the dancer in the air. So that might not be accessible for all dancers, but if I said bounce instead, a seated dancer, for example, could bounce their hands on their lap, or they could bounce their arms and have a feeling of rebound and bounce in the arms. So moving forward with my practice, I would like to apply the universal design theory and adapt my instructional language so it caters to the needs of all students. Moving on to the next theme, class structure and routine. A clear defined class structure, including routines, can have a positive impact on SEND students. I think clear class structure has a positive impact on all students, not necessarily just SEND students, because some students can be anxious about the unknown and they like to have their routine. And routines such as housekeeping stuff, letting them in, letting them out, I think is very important. So this emerged as a theme from the primary data. So when I watched the observation participants, they both had a really similar structure. So it was greetings and a register, warm up, 2 to 3 exercises, then a cool down. And at every point they returned to a circle before each section, thus showing a routine of circles. Moving over to the left now to the secondary data. Block and Johnson, I've got a quote there that shows they're discussing the benefits of a clear structure for autistic students. So a regimented dance rehearsal, and then they go through a similar kind of structure to what I witnessed, will satisfy their need for structure and routine. So again, corroborating the theory of structures and routines there. Moving over to the right, to my experience, as I say, I think class structure is important for all and routines. In terms of circles as a specific routine, I have avoided circles with autistic children to avoid discomfort. Because looking at the quote below from Tanaka and Son, they say individuals with autism show a preference for the mouth features and avoidance of the eye features. So what I've witnessed in my students is they're not so comfortable with eye contact. And if you're in a circle, there's lots of eyes that could be looking at you. So they could be quite uncomfortable with that. Those kind of students sometimes have wanted to stay at the back of the class and not be right in the middle and be the center of attention. So I think we have to be sensitive to that as dance teachers. So therefore, moving forward with my practice, I would like to create a welcoming procedure to get detailed information on individual needs and use circles where appropriate. So if I've got the information about the student's needs and whether they might have avoidance of eye contact or autism, then I will decide on a case-by-case basis if something like circles is appropriate. But the welcoming procedure will help all students. Moving on to the next theme, resources, the tools that support dance teachers to facilitate learning in inclusive classes. So I looked at, there's many resources I could have looked at. I looked at human resources, so assistants and equipment. So the starting point for this theme came from my journaling and the kind of sticking points in my practice. And I rarely have assistants. So that has really been a sticking point for me when having SEND students in a class, because again, I feel torn between the needs of the group and that of the SEND student. Also, in non-formal education, where these are small dance businesses, there often isn't the money to pay for lots of resources. So again, Audra's study that's been influential to my work, she said, the resources reported in this paper, such as the number of teaching assistants, may not be available to private studio teachers, which could limit the extent to which they can meet students' needs. So for that study, the ISTD teachers and the SEND dance specialists, they could bring their support that they have, their assistance, to help those ISTD teachers, which she's saying isn't always possible. Looking over to the left, I'm going to look at the primary and secondary data for human resources. So observation participant 2, she had wheelchair dancer assistants in her classes who were able to provide individualized feedback for the students. Morris, Baldian and Schulerman say it is impactful for students to see a diversity of bodies as representative models for them to emulate, thus helping them with their sense of belonging and feeling welcome within the class. Then looking over to the right side at equipment, in the observations, I saw lots of equipment being used, lots of sensory props, ear defenders, dance wheelchairs, as I've mentioned, which are slightly different to normal wheelchairs, lighter and fixed frame, and some other resources as too. So I looked into kind of sensory toys, because I have lots of sensory toys available for my preschool classes. So sensory toys may be more appealing to children on the spectrum because they can help the child remain calm and provide the sensory experience they want. So sensory toys can be beneficial to the SEND students. I thought most dance teachers in non-formal education who do classes for younger students might have these props available, but surprisingly, only 36% of survey respondents said that they use sensory objects, which I was quite surprised by. But then on further reflection, when you think about the financial cost it could be to get a sensory toy from, say, if there's maybe 20 students in the class, it soon adds up monetarily. So moving forward with my practice in ways I can source resources, I would like to contact universities to see if I can find volunteer assistants. So that could be students on dance or education courses who might find the experience relevant, and maybe local charitable organisations to see if I could get funding for more equipment. Say if I had a disabled dancer who could benefit from using a dance wheelchair, then it would be great to be able to source one of those. Okay, the final theme is non-verbal communication. So that's tools such as Makaton and visual aids that can benefit the learning experience of students. Makaton is a sign language that can be used alongside speech to help those with communication difficulties. This emerged as a starting point in the primary data. When I watched observation participant 1, I recognized some familiar signs. I know a few, and I recognize some of them, like thank you, listen, and finished. Signing finished helps autistic students. As Block and Johnson say, clearly articulated cues should be given before transitioning. So signing finished can also help to emphasize the class structure in a non-verbal way to avoid anxiety about the unknown. Now looking over to the right-hand side to the primary data, survey participant 6 said first and thens work well, which is an FTB board, which I've put at the bottom there for you to see. So it's got first and then next. So if you look just above, Mohammed and Abdallah say an FTB board is a fundamental language base that provides step-by-step visual instructions and ordering of upcoming events. Again, supporting that class structure, but in a non-verbal way. Jumping back up to that primary data there, survey participant 6 also mentioned communication methods, AAC. So upon further research, AAC stands for Augmentative Alternative Communication and can be used as the umbrella term for nonverbal communication. There's other things that could be described within that. If you head down to the bottom there, one of those other things could be a social story. So I'm going to come more to the social story a bit later on, because my artifact, well, very shortly actually, because my artifact is a social story. So moving forward, I would like to attend further Mechaton training. I would like to create more social stories like the one I'm about to show you, and I would like to source an FTB board. So on critical reflection of this research and the course as a whole, the outcomes have been that the research has helped me to align with my values as a dance educator, that dance can be enjoyed by all. It has provided me with actionable steps for my practice, so the ones you saw in the triangle. It has provoked ideas for further research, so I really like to look into the impact that lack of regulation in non-formal education has on inclusivity in non-formal dance classes. The course has taught me ways to continue to develop my professional practice, so analysing it through the lens of ethics and Web 2.0 and networks that we looked at in Module 1. And also I will be continuing my training on a Masters of Dance Education, where we will look at differentiation and inclusion as a topic. So I look forward to studying it more then. Let's take a look at my artifact. So, as I said, it's a social story, so another nonverbal communication method. The social story accurately describes the situation, where it occurs, who is involved, and what actually happens, and provides the child with specific information about what occurs and why. So, for this social story, this was something that emerged from that inclusive training that I've undertaken recently, and it helps, particularly with autistic children, again, it helps provide comfort in knowing what to expect. It can also help parents, if they know a bit more about the class, if there's anything they need to know, they need to notify me about that comes from looking at this social story, then they can let me know before class, and I can adapt my teaching methods and differentiate appropriately. So I try to find inclusive images to include on this. So after further research, it was said it was important to talk in the first person and use as simpler and succinct language as possible. I'm going to dance class. Before dance class, I will wear comfortable clothes. I will go to the toilet. I will bring water, things to do prior to class. Get into the dance class so they know what the venue looks like, so they're not overwhelmed by what the place looks like. Also some information for the grown-up there about where they will wait. Their classroom picture of me as well, so hopefully that's a friendly face that they can be familiar with already before coming to the class. Some illustrations to show what they're going to do so they know what to expect. Circles kind of show the routine that emerged in the structure and routines theme. Dancing with other students, and the listen part there kind of symbolizes what came up in the non-verbal communication as well. If you need a safe space, so safe space is something that emerged from engaging with my network of students on the course. Unfortunately, it didn't quite fit into the scope of any of my themes today, but it's something I'd like to look at further. I've shown lots of sensory objects again, because they were important to my practice and other things they might use. Again, some more illustrations. Stickers, I've often found students can get quite put off by the texture of stickers. So yeah, again, something that parents can let me know if it's not suitable for their student. Fabulous. I am going to dance class. So that's the end of the artifact. And I hope that this artifact and all the positive approaches and themes that I've constructed will benefit all the students in my practice and continue to develop my professional practice further. Here is a bibliography of the sources I've used. Thank you for watching.